Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
And welcome back to another edition of Capital Connection. Fridays during the Noon Report, we give you direct connection to what's happening in Albany and Harrisburg with the experts on the issues. At the state capitals, they are Jason McGuire with New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and Dan Bartkowiak at the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Dan, want to start with you. Vaccination saturation. About half the Commonwealth so far has received at least one of the COVID vaccines. And we saw next door, Ohio, they're doing interesting things to kind of generate interest. This vaccine lottery where they'll award $1 million to 5 people who get the vaccine, trying to drum up support for this. Have we reached a saturation point, or will we soon reach a saturation point where everybody who wants the shot will have gotten the shot? And do you think the governor will impose maybe some draconian measures to try to bump up those numbers?
Yeah, well, it's certainly one way in Ohio to use essentially taxpayer dollars for getting the vaccine. And one thing with Ohio is that about a third of the population has been vaccinated. And as you mentioned, Bob, Pennsylvania's population, roughly about half. AP reports even more than half have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And I think bottom line, people who want the vaccine are able to receive it. So whatever Governor Wolf ends up marketing in Pennsylvania for the vaccine, I think one thing that's for certain is Pennsylvanians don't want to be forced into this decision. We don't want to see any of the draconian measures that Governor Wolf has taken before happening again in Pennsylvania.
And I only mentioned that, Dan, because it seems like New York's already taken that step. Just getting so many calls about this decision that impacts the students who attend SUNY and CUNY schools. We're talking, over 100,000 kids here, Jason. They are now forced to get the vaccine, or they cannot attend in-person classes in the fall, sending shockwaves through the state. What's going to be the fallout from that?
Well, we're receiving a lot of calls in our office regarding this, too. And this is another example of how Governor Cuomo proclaims something at a press conference, but there's literally nothing legal to back it up, at least as of yet. There is nothing on paper. This is merely a press release statement. So I think that what the governor is attempting to do is to use the bully pulpit and the impression that people have to receive this, but we don't even yet have that full approval for these vaccinations. And so, people that are concerned about receiving the vaccination, they should not feel like at this point they have to receive it, despite what the governor says. We'll have to wait and watch and see how this unfolds over the coming months.
Yeah, and again, there's no more religious exemption in New York either, right?
Well, there is no religious exemption for lower grades, so high school and, regular school students. But for college level, there is still a religious and medical exemption. So there are other options for those that do not wish to receive the vaccination. All
right, we'll see where this goes. Dan, let's not forget, next Tuesday is primary day, May 18th. It is nearly here. We've talked ad nauseum about those ballot questions on the governor's pandemic powers, but there are other things on that ballot this year that are really worth paying attention to. What else is on there, and why should folks turn out on Tuesday?
Absolutely. May 18th, yes, please vote. The importance of those ballot questions, the balance of power really in our state. But there's also, 3 statewide races for judicial positions, school board candidates. There's many candidates that are running for these important races. So go to pafamilyvoter.com is where you can find information about those candidates, about the ballot questions. We want you to be an educated voter. May 18th, please vote, and you can go to pafamilyvoter.com for more.
Big news out of New York State. Jason, Rob Astorino running again for governor. This is his second time. Got trounced in 2014, but these are different times for sure. A lot of folks are wondering how he stacks up against Lee Zeldin, the frontrunner, the Long Island congressman. Which one poses a bigger challenge to Governor Cuomo?
That is the question of the hour, is how that's going to unfold. unfold. I think that Congressman Zeldin has the early lead. He is locking up the both Republican and conservative chairs around the state. Rob Astorino, though, has said he's going to stay in this through the primary. He has indicated that should he lose the primary, that they will unify the ticket and move forward. It'll be interesting to see, because I think Representative Zeldin is going to have some issues regarding his vote on January 6th and his concerns over the election last November. And that will hurt him in a state where there are many people who did not back President Trump. Yeah. Rob Astorino, however, does seem to handle the press and the media well, and so there may be an electability argument that he will make before the public, and the voters will decide, not this year, but next.
All right, 3 candidates in the race so far, but those are the 2 that we're definitely keeping an eye on. Dan, efforts are underway in Harrisburg while we're talking elections to reform the state's election laws. I heard one expert say that voter fraud is voter suppression. Where are we on things like voter ID, the signature matching, better training of poll workers? I know this is something that the General Assembly has been trying to pass this session.
Yeah, well, one thing, we appreciate leadership from State Representative Seth Grove, who chairs the House State Government Committee. They just finished 10 hearings on election improvements, and he just released a 99-page report summarizing those hearings. And one thing he said is, we need to make voting easier and harder to cheat. And so certainly we would agree, all the experts that talked, election administrations, advocates, policy experts, trying to make improvements. And certainly we can improve our election law. I think that's about, we all know that. Yeah. And so I think this is a good step forward, Representative Grove and others that are looking to make those improvements here in Pennsylvania.
The State Assembly in Albany, Jason, approved 2 constitutional amendments this week, making it easier to vote. One would increase access to absentee ballots. The other allows for same-day voter registration. Your thoughts on this, and where does it go next?
Well, I am concerned. I mean, these are topics that you obviously want voting to be accessible to people, but we don't have conversations regarding voter ID here in New York. So it always seems like we're making it easier and easier, but we don't have accountability on the other side. Mm-hmm. And that concerns me, because obviously we want to know that there's integrity in the process, and you have to question with this being loosened all the time, and yet there being very little accountability. At some point, you just have to say enough is enough. Yeah. These are no votes that are likely going to be heading to constitutional amendments where the voters will have a chance to weigh in on the ballot as to whether or not they want to expand those voting rights and accessibility, and the voters will make a decision as to whether or not to support those measures.
Yeah, of course, we're talking, these at the state level, but keep an eye on SB 1 in the U.S. Senate as well, because that may be coming down the pipeline soon, which would federalize elections in our country. So lots to be watching out for sure when it comes to this whole issue. Dan, we talked at the top of the program about vaccines and the rate of vaccinations, about 50% now in both New York and Pennsylvania. Governor Wolf has said that, these restrictions are coming off when it comes to capacity limits around Memorial Day. The masks are staying on, and they're not coming off until the vaccination rate is at 70%. So you got some work to do there. You think you'll ever get there?
Well, look at what he said about the capacity limits. So obviously, Governor Wolf, I don't know where he came up with the 70% number he's using for vaccinations, but look at what he said about the gathering restrictions. He said, quote, maybe we should have done it May 15th. Maybe we should have waited till September 1st. I don't know, end quote. And so it underscores, when you don't work with the industries that are most involved, when you don't work with the legislature, you start to question why you're making those types of data-based decisions. Where's the data? Where are you getting these decisions from? And so, again, will we get to that 70%? I think the bottom line is we need a balance of power. May 18th, the people of Pennsylvania have the opportunity to truly balance that power in voting against these draconian, unilateral decisions that our governor keeps making.
All right. Well, finally, this is huge. We saved it for last, but it should have been first, Jason. This is the time of year that makes you sweat a lot. That late session surge of left-of-center legislation. There is a lot of things that could happen between now and the 10th of June when the session ends. What are you watching out for?
number of things. We're watching to see whether or not the legislature is going to authorize that mandatory sex ed in public schools. We're concerned about that. There's a late session push for assisted suicide. There is a measure that known as Senate 75 that would actually set up a vaccine database statewide and would hinder some privacy rights of individuals in our state. So there's a lot to watch in the coming days.
All right, and you can learn more by going online. Jason, you have a wonderful website, sir. What is it?
AlbanyUpdate.com.
Primary day right around the corner in Pennsylvania. Where can folks get that voter guide, Dan?
PAFamilyVoter.com.